The automatic doors of Liberty First Bank's Greenfield branch slid open at precisely 9:03 a.m. and enrolled 65-year-old Walter Jennings. His wheelchair gliding quietly over the polished floors, dressed in a simple gray windbreaker and a well-worn cap pulled low. Walter's unassuming presence did little to draw attention, and that was precisely the point. He wheeled slowly through the lobby, observing the surroundings with a calm, steady gaze before approaching the front counter. The staff, just settling into their morning routines with coffee cups in hand, barely glanced his way. A few customers sat with heads down, focused on their phones, unaware of the quiet storm about to unfold. "Excuse me," Walter said, his voice steady and polite. "May I speak with the branch manager?" Behind the counter stood 34-year-old Kelly Andrews, a sharply dressed woman with a platinum bob and eyes lined heavily with mascara. Her response was curt, without lifting her gaze fully from her clipboard. She shot back, "Do you have an appointment?" When Walter answered no, she sighed audibly and dismissed him with a raised palm, turning away to chat with a colleague. As Walter sat quietly, processing the scene, Kelly's dismissiveness escalated. She openly mocked him to her coworker, assuming he was a nuisance with no importance. Her voice was loud enough for the nearby customers to overhear, including a mother and teenage son, who exchanged uncertain glances. Walter wasn't surprised by her behavior. He had encountered such disregard before. But this time, he wasn't just a man in a wheelchair seeking a manager. This time, he carried something far more powerful in his quiet resolve. The room seemed to shrink as the air thickened with discomfort. A teenage boy sitting with his mother glanced uneasily at Walter, and an older gentleman near the back of the room shook his head. Still, Walter remained composed. With quiet determination, he produced a folded document from his lap and asked Kelly to hand it to the manager. Instead, she scoffed and dismissed him again, pushing the paper aside with a manicured nail. Watching nearby was Eduardo, a client services representative, who had overheard enough, though Kelly tried to dismiss his involvement. Eduardo stepped forward and calmly read the document. His eyes widened. "This is from corporate," he said, voice lowering. Kelly's expression faltered, and Eduardo added, "I think you should get the manager now." The realization of her error rippled across the room. Eduardo's quiet authority made it clear something more serious was at play. Kelly's initial bravado gave way to nervousness, though she still hadn't grasped the full gravity of the situation. When Brian Curtis, the branch manager, arrived moments later, he recognized Walter instantly. The polite man in the wheelchair was not just any visitor. He was a partial owner of the entire bank. Kelly's face paled as understanding dawned. Brian ushered Walter into his office, where he reviewed the bank's security footage of the morning's events. The video captured Kelly's dismissiveness and the shift in the room's energy. "I'm not here to fire people," Walter said, his tone even. "But I'm not here to be treated like a street beggar, either." Brian nodded solemnly, acknowledging the misstep. Back in the lobby, the ripple effect continued. Staff members and clients alike realized they had witnessed more than a simple customer service mistake. They had seen a profound lesson unfold in real time. Eduardo's courage to step forward, the silent tension from the customers, and Kelly's eventual unraveling highlighted a deeper truth. Respect and dignity should not be contingent on someone's perceived status. When Kelly was quietly dismissed from her role, it wasn't out of spite or revenge. It was a necessary step to uphold the integrity of the bank. Walter's quiet but powerful demeanor taught everyone present a lesson they wouldn't soon forget. As he left the branch that day, he was met with a genuine gesture. A client held the door open for him, not out of obligation but as an acknowledgement of the dignity he deserved. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. Staff greeted clients with newfound sincerity, and whispers of the day's events passed between them like an unspoken pledge to do better. In the aftermath of the tense scene at Liberty First Bank's Greenfield branch, the staff and patrons were left to grapple with a new understanding of integrity and accountability. Walter Jennings, The quiet man in the wheelchair who had entered that morning had revealed himself not just as a customer but as a part owner of the entire banking institution. His composed demeanor, unwavering even in the face of humiliation by Kelly Andrews, the dismissive teller, highlighted his strength of character and the profound impact of silent dignity. As Kelly's condescending comments and disregard for Walter's presence became clear to the rest of the room, so too did the realization that appearances can be deceptive, and respect should never be conditional on one's perceived social standing. Brian Curtis, the branch manager, had been drawn into the unfolding drama when Eduardo, the observant client services representative, recognized the document Walter presented as an official corporate communication. With quiet urgency, Eduardo insisted on escalating the matter, forcing Brian to confront the uncomfortable reality of Kelly's behavior. In his office, Brian reviewed the security footage that captured Kelly's dismissive treatment of Walter, as well as the reactions of others in the branch, Eduardo's quiet defiance, the client's discomfort, and Walter's composed patience. Brian's acknowledgement of the footage and his quiet commitment to address the issue underscored the weight of responsibility that comes with leadership. As the realization of Walter's identity spread through the branch, so did an unspoken shift in atmosphere. Kelly's dismissal was swift, but not dramatic. It was a necessary acknowledgement of her failure to uphold the dignity of every person she encountered. Yet, the true transformation lay not in her removal, but in the silent agreements forming among the remaining staff and patrons. Eduardo's willingness to speak up, despite the risk of overstepping hierarchical boundaries, became a symbol of quiet courage. Terrence, a young teller who had hesitated but ultimately recorded the incident, learned that sometimes the act of bearing witness is itself a powerful form of resistance. The presence of Judith Emerson, a respected client and regional investor, added further weight to the situation. Her respectful greeting to Walter, followed by her poised observation of the unfolding events, reinforced the importance of recognizing and valuing character over appearances. Judith's later call to corporate, detailing the incident without embellishment, served not as an act of retaliation but as a firm declaration of the standards to which the bank must hold itself. Her words, "Your people don't need more training, they need more listening," resonated deeply, encapsulating the day's central lesson. Walter's parting words to the staff, spoken without anger but with quiet conviction, left a lasting impression. The way you treat a person when you think they can't help you, that's the version of yourself the world remembers. He said, his message was not about punishment but about accountability and growth. By the time he exited the branch, leaving behind an air of introspection and renewed commitment, it was clear that the incident had sparked more than just disciplinary action. It had ignited a deeper reflection on how dignity and respect should permeate every interaction. Regardless of circumstance, the change was subtle but tangible. Staff members began to greet clients with a genuine warmth that hadn't been present before. Eduardo lingered near the front desk, not to assert authority, but to ensure a standard of decency was upheld. Terrence, newly aware of the power of observation and quiet action, resolved to treat every customer with the respect they deserved. Even the clients, some of whom had watched the events unfold in silence, carried with them a newfound understanding of the power of small acts of dignity. Walter's visit that day was not marked by loud confrontations or public declarations, but by a quiet, steadfast assertion of worth. His actions reminded everyone that character is revealed not through titles or roles, but through the way we treat each other, especially when we believe no one is watching. His legacy at that branch would not be measured by policies rewritten or procedures changed, but by the silent promise among its people to honor dignity, respect, and humanity in every interaction that followed. After the dust settled at Liberty First Bank's Greenfield branch, what lingered wasn't the dramatic firing of Kelly Andrews or the revelation of Walter Jennings' ownership of the branch. It was the quiet, profound ripple of understanding that washed over everyone present. Walter's composed demeanor and unwavering commitment to dignity had transformed the room into a space of reflection. Though Kelly's words had belittled him, Walter's calm persistence revealed a deeper truth. True power doesn't scream for attention. It speaks softly and lets its actions resonate. As Walter left, it was as if the very air had changed. The branch, once buzzing with routine chatter and mechanical greetings, now hummed with a newfound sense of purpose. Inside, the staff stood motionless, as if still absorbing the lesson Walter's presence had imparted. Brian Curtis, the branch manager, had witnessed firsthand how easy it was for an institution to fail its most basic promise: to treat every person with respect. His conversation with Walter in the privacy of his office wasn't about damage control or corporate protocol. It was an acknowledgement of failure and a quiet commitment to change. Walter's firm but kind words, paired with his insistence on reviewing the surveillance footage, had painted a clear picture. The way you treat someone when you think they can't help you, that's what defines your character, he had said, leaving Brian with a message that couldn't be ignored. The shift wasn't confined to management. Eduardo, the client services representative who'd risked stepping in, became a quiet symbol of courage. His actions weren't loud or disruptive, but his insistence on escalating the situation, even when Kelly tried to brush it off, spoke volumes. Terrence, the young teller who had hesitated but ultimately recorded the incident, learned that sometimes the simple act of bearing witness is an act of quiet defiance. His resolve to quietly delete the recording once it was clear the truth was acknowledged underscored the lesson Walter had left behind: that dignity doesn't need spectacle to be remembered. Clients, too, felt the shift. Judith Emerson, a longtime investor who had quietly stood by Walter's side, later made a call to corporate, not out of obligation, but out of a deep respect for the integrity Walter displayed. Her words echoed the core message of the day: your people don't need more training, they need more listening. It wasn't a condemnation, it was a reminder that respect is a choice made in small moments. When it's easiest to overlook someone, even the teenager who had observed the scene whispered to his mother as they left, "He's not what I expected." And his mother's quiet reply, "That's the point, baby, people never are," captured the essence of Walter's silent protest. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in the branch was different. Staff members greeted each customer with genuine warmth, a subtle but noticeable shift from the mechanical interactions of before. Eduardo's presence near the front desk became less about his role and more about ensuring decency was upheld. Terrence's demeanor softened, his voice carrying a sincerity that made clients feel seen and valued. Even the clients, who might have once sat silently in the waiting area, now carried themselves with an awareness that dignity isn't a luxury reserved for the few. Walter's impact wasn't measured in dramatic policy changes or public statements. It was in the quiet recalibration of a space that had briefly forgotten its humanity. His message, that dignity, respect, and kindness are not contingent on status, left an indelible mark. His actions reminded everyone that real power isn't about commanding attention, but about quietly standing firm in the face of ignorance. And perhaps most importantly, his legacy at that branch wasn't the termination of a single employee, but the silent, shared commitment among its staff and clients to ensure that everyone, no matter how they look or what they carry, is treated as a person first. In the end, it wasn't a story about a man in a wheelchair. It was a story about perception, about how one person's quiet strength can change an entire room, and about how sometimes the greatest lessons come from those we least expect. In the days following the incident at Liberty First Bank's Greenfield branch, the story wasn't just about the quiet but firm actions of Walter Jennings. It was about how a community of employees, clients, and even bystanders found themselves reevaluating their own choices, both past and future. Kelly Andrews' dismissal wasn't the crescendo of a dramatic corporate scandal, but a somber punctuation to a day that revealed more about the people in that branch than any memo or quarterly review ever could. It was a day when silence spoke louder than outrage, when Walter's calm insistence on dignity held more weight than a shouted reprimand. It was also a day when those who had watched, Terrence the teller, Eduardo the client services representative, Even Judith, the longtime investor, found themselves caught between past complicity and a future where they could no longer pretend not to notice. Eduardo, who had risked quietly challenging Kelly's dismissiveness, knew that his stand wasn't about securing favor from corporate. It was about the small moments when integrity demanded presence. His decision to stand his ground, even when it could have jeopardized his own position, became an unspoken standard for the branch. Terrence, whose hesitant decision to record the scene was motivated not by a desire for virality but by a deep, gnawing discomfort with what he witnessed, realized that his role wasn't to capture drama but to ensure accountability. The fact that he deleted the recording when it was no longer needed to prove the truth underscored the lesson Walter embodied. Real change doesn't need a camera. It needs courage and reflection. Judith's quiet call to corporate, delivered not with theatrics but with the calm, factual recounting of what she saw, echoed Walter's silent protest. Her words, "Your people don't need more training. They need more listening," carried through the upper levels of the company, serving as a subtle but clear indictment of a culture that had prioritized metrics over meaning. It wasn't a condemnation of policy, but a plea for humanity. Her presence at the branch, the respectful nod she shared with Walter, and her willingness to stand beside him when others hesitated, transformed her from a respected client into a quiet ally of justice. The ripple effect reached beyond the walls of the bank. The teenager who had sat with his mother during the incident, initially unaware of its significance, returned later with a simple request to open his first account. His whispered admission to Terrence, that he liked how Walter didn't yell, wasn't about hero worship, but about the subtle recognition that strength doesn't need volume. Terrence's response, "Best decision you'll make today," wasn't just a pleasantry, but a quiet acknowledgement that dignity and respect were now part of the branch's identity, something that could be passed down to the next generation of customers. Inside the branch, the staff began to adjust, not because of an official memo, but because the tone had been reset. Employees who had once relied on routine began greeting customers with renewed sincerity. Eduardo lingered near the front desk, not to hover but to ensure everyone who approached was seen and heard. Terrence's demeanor shifted from mechanical efficiency to authentic engagement, his interactions tinged with the weight of what he'd witnessed. The loan officer who had hesitated to speak up during the incident later found her voice, quietly affirming that acknowledging wrongs was as important as preventing them. Clarence, the janitor, became an unexpected voice of wisdom, his quiet words to Walter capturing the essence of what had been lost and what could be regained. Respect doesn't come from a title. His decades of overlooked service, his steady presence as the first one in and the last one out, now resonated with meaning. As the staff realized that true integrity often resides in those who move through spaces unseen, yet indispensable. Walter's visit, unexpected and unassuming, didn't just expose one employee's failure, it illuminated an entire system's need for introspection. His parting words, his refusal to be reduced to a mere title or to accept a perfunctory apology, reminded everyone that dignity isn't granted, it's recognized. His actions underscored a truth that lingered long after the doors closed. The real test of a community's character lies not in how it treats its high-value clients, but in how it treats the quiet, unassuming individual who asks simply to be seen. And perhaps, just perhaps, the ripple he left behind will continue to echo, reminding everyone at Liberty First Bank, and beyond, that the smallest acts of respect can redefine a culture, one quiet interaction at a time. In the aftermath of Walter Jennings' quiet but profound stand at Liberty First Bank's Greenfield branch, the lessons he imparted rippled far beyond the marble floors and glass walls of the building. It wasn't just a story of a client, underestimated because of his unassuming appearance and wheelchair, humbling a dismissive employee. It was a lesson in the power of perception, and the danger of letting assumptions guide actions. Walter's dignity and measured calm in the face of Kelly Andrews' condescension and disrespect served as a mirror for everyone who witnessed the scene. Even those who hadn't been directly involved. like the teenager who watched with his mother or Clarence the janitor, found themselves reflecting on what it means to see and truly recognize another person. Walter's ability to remain composed, even as Kelly's attitude escalated, was an act of quiet resilience. He didn't resort to raising his voice or making threats. Instead, he maintained his dignity, relying on the weight of his presence and the truth in his hands, the document from corporate that quietly reminded everyone of his role and influence. His deliberate choice to reveal his identity not with fanfare but through a simple, understated request to speak to the branch manager was a masterclass in patience. It underscored the message that respect isn't something earned through intimidation or status. It's something owed to every person who crosses the threshold of a business. The staff, from Eduardo the client services representative to Terrence the young teller, experienced a shift in perspective that day. Eduardo's decision to challenge Kelly's dismissive tone, albeit gently, was a small but crucial act of allyship. His willingness to step in, even when Kelly dismissed him, demonstrated integrity and courage. Terrence's instinct to document the encounter, and his subsequent decision to delete the footage once it was clear the truth was undeniable, reflected a growing understanding of the responsibility each person carries in standing up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. The moment when Judith Emery, a respected long-term client, quietly acknowledged Walter's presence and supportively stood by his side, underscored the power of community in holding institutions accountable. The shift extended to the bank's culture itself. Brian Covington, the branch manager, recognized the gravity of the situation. His choice to review the surveillance footage with Walter, to accept responsibility for not addressing Kelly's behavior earlier, and to facilitate her dismissal wasn't just a reaction to one bad day. It was an acknowledgement of a deeper issue. It revealed how easy it is to overlook poor behavior when it's masked by procedural efficiency and polished performance metrics. But Walter's visit stripped away that veneer, forcing the branch to confront its own complacency. For Clarence, the janitor who had quietly observed for decades, Walter's actions validated what he had long known. Respect isn't tied to a person's role or title. His simple, heartfelt gratitude to Walter wasn't just about the events of that day. It was an acknowledgement of a shared understanding born from years of moving through a world where people often look past those they perceive as unimportant. Clarence's words served as a reminder to the staff, and to all who heard them, that the true test of a community's character lies in how it treats those who aren't in positions of power. The teenager who returned to open an account with Terrence later that day captured the essence of the story's impact. His admiration wasn't for Walter's status or wealth but for his quiet strength, the way he didn't yell, but still commanded respect. In that small interaction, a seed was planted. The understanding that leadership isn't about asserting dominance, but about exemplifying respect, patience, and integrity. As staff members returned to their desks and clients resumed their transactions, there was an unspoken awareness that something had changed. People spoke softer, listened more attentively, and greeted one another with a newfound sincerity. Walter's departure wasn't accompanied by applause or grand statements. Instead, it was marked by a simple act of human decency, a client holding the door for him. Not out of obligation, but because it was right. That final gesture, as sunlight streamed into the lobby and the quiet settled over the space, encapsulated the day's lesson. The power to create meaningful change lies in how we choose to treat one another, especially when we think no one is watching. Walter Jennings' story wasn't just about a bank visit gone wrong. It was about the transformative power of dignity and respect, and how one person's silent stand can inspire a ripple of reflection that reaches far beyond a single institution. Walter Jennings' visit to Liberty First Bank's Greenfield branch didn't just shake the branch's internal culture. It resonated in a way that transcended the walls of the building. The core of the story wasn't solely about Walter's quiet strength or Kelly Andrews' eventual downfall. It was about the transformative impact of respect and the collective realization of its absence. Walter's experience served as a catalyst for both introspection and accountability. not just for those directly involved but also for those who observed. Like clients, staff, and even passers-by, the story became a lesson in how the smallest interactions, whether respectful or dismissive, carry weight and can define an entire institution's identity. Walter's dignified approach to the situation stood in stark contrast to Kelly's arrogance and disregard. His calm demeanor as he unfolded the corporate document was a silent but powerful assertion of his worth. He didn't have to demand respect with raised voices or dramatic gestures. His presence, his patience, and his insistence on being treated as a human being spoke volumes. His decision to engage with the branch manager, Brian Covington, and request a review of the security footage wasn't about personal vindication. It was about exposing a deeper truth: that systems and cultures within institutions often turn a blind eye to dismissive behavior until it's publicly challenged. The ripple effects of Walter's encounter were profound. Eduardo's subtle but firm intervention highlighted the importance of allyship in moments of injustice. Though his role in the branch wasn't one of high authority, his willingness to stand up for what was right, even against a more senior colleague, illustrated the potential for integrity to shift narratives. Terrence's instinct to record the scene, driven by a sense of responsibility rather than malice, and his later decision to delete it when it was no longer necessary, revealed the complexity of standing up in moments of conflict. His hesitation, his concern about rank and protocol, mirrored the internal struggles many face when confronted with injustice in professional settings. Clarence, the janitor, embodied the quiet wisdom of an observer who had seen it all. His gratitude toward Walter wasn't rooted in surprise but in recognition. For years, he had watched people like Kelly rise through the ranks based on appearances and numbers rather than character. Walter's presence and actions validated what Clarence had always known: that true respect is not tied to position, but to behavior and humanity. His words, though simple, echoed a powerful truth: respect is earned through consistent actions, not titles. Judith Emery's role in the narrative added a layer of depth to the unfolding story. As a longtime client and respected figure in the community, her acknowledgement of Walter and her choice to stand visibly with him reinforced the idea that respect crosses lines of status and influence. Her words to the staff weren't confrontational but were laced with an implicit reminder that institutions must be built on more than profit. They must stand on a foundation of respect and humanity. The impact of that day didn't end with Kelly's termination. The mood in the branch shifted palpably. Staff members greeted clients with more attentiveness, paused longer in conversations, and listened more deeply. The teenager who returned to open his first account symbolized the broader impact: a young person learning, not through lectures but through observation. That leadership isn't about force, it's about integrity. His admiration for Walter's calm presence spoke volumes about the silent power of character. As Walter rolled out of the branch, assisted by a simple act of kindness from a client who held the door, the silence that followed wasn't hollow, it was filled with reflection. Those who witnessed the events of that day were left to grapple with their own roles in either perpetuating or challenging a culture that rewards arrogance and dismisses quiet dignity. Brian's final words to the team, to ensure that no such reminder would ever be needed again, resonated deeply. It wasn't about policies or procedures, it was about choices, daily, deliberate choices to see the humanity in everyone, regardless of appearances or circumstances. In a world where respect is often reserved for those who hold power, Walter Jennings' story reminded everyone that true power lies not in demanding recognition but in choosing to treat others with the dignity they deserve. It was a lesson that echoed beyond the bank lobby, into homes, communities, and perhaps most importantly, into the hearts of those who would carry it forward. As the dust settled at Liberty First Bank's Greenfield branch, the story of Walter Jennings was not just a fleeting headline. It etched itself into the consciousness of everyone who witnessed it. His encounter with Kelly Andrews wasn't simply about an isolated act of disrespect but about a culture that had become complacent in its treatment of those who seemed powerless. The significance of Walter's quiet defiance and the lessons drawn from it didn't end with Kelly's departure. It sparked a broader reflection on how institutions, and the people within them, must reconcile with their collective responsibility toward respect and dignity. Walter's journey through that day was a study in understated strength. He didn't wield power with loud declarations or public outrage. Instead, his authority was evident in his composed demeanor, his unshakable patience, and his unwillingness to be diminished by someone else's ignorance. His actions, especially his decision to involve Brian Covington, the branch manager, not as an adversary but as an ally in upholding integrity, underscored a vital truth. Real change starts with a quiet insistence on fairness. Walter's calm articulation of his expectations and his request to review the surveillance footage were not acts of retaliation but of accountability. His approach demonstrated that the fight for respect isn't about ego, it's about principles. The ripple effect of that moment was tangible. Eduardo's intervention, though subtle, signified the weight of moral courage. His choice to confront Kelly's dismissive behavior, despite the potential risks, illuminated the power of standing up for what's right. Eduardo's actions mirrored the inner conflict many face in professional environments, between self-preservation and the responsibility to uphold justice. Similarly, Terrence's hesitant decision to record the encounter reflected both the instinct to document injustice and the struggle to know when it's necessary to act. His eventual choice to delete the video, after Walter assured him the message had been heard, underscored a key lesson. Sometimes, the mere act of witnessing and acknowledging wrongdoings is more impactful than recording them. Clarence, the janitor, encapsulated the soul of the story. His heartfelt gratitude toward Walter wasn't born from surprise but from recognition, a validation of what he had silently observed for decades. Clarence's acknowledgement of how respect is often withheld from those in perceived positions of low power resonated deeply with the staff. His perspective reinforced the idea that true respect doesn't stem from job titles or corporate rank. It's rooted in humanity. His words weren't loud or dramatic, but they lingered, adding layers of meaning to the day's events. Judith Emery's role was equally significant. As a respected regional client, her presence and public support for Walter reframed the narrative. Her choice to stand visibly with him, to recognize his authority and integrity, sent an unspoken message to both staff and clients. Respect isn't a commodity exchanged for power. It's a basic human right. Her words, delivered without fanfare but with unmistakable clarity, bridged the gap between institutional culture and individual responsibility. Judith's influence reminded everyone that those with privilege and voice have a responsibility to use them wisely, especially when faced with injustice. The legacy of that day wasn't confined to the moment Kelly walked out. Badge surrendered and dignity fractured. It echoed in the subtle shifts in behavior among the staff, the way greetings became warmer, conversations more thoughtful, and interactions imbued with genuine attention. The teenager who returned to open his first account wasn't just inspired by Walter's quiet strength. He represented a new generation absorbing the lesson that leadership is not measured by volume or visibility but by integrity. His admiration for Walter's composed presence, and his decision to align himself with an institution that had witnessed and addressed its own failing, signaled the profound impact of one individual's stance. As Walter exited the branch, aided by a client's small but meaningful gesture of holding the door, the silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable, it was contemplative. The staff, clients, and even casual observers were left to reckon with how they might have contributed to a culture that allowed Kelly's behavior to persist. Brian Covington's closing remarks about ensuring the branch would never need such a reminder again were more than aspirational. They were a call to action. It was a moment of collective self-examination, a recognition that the true measure of an institution's character isn't in how it treats its most influential clients but in how it responds to those who are often overlooked. Walter Jennings' story at Liberty First Bank wasn't just about a single confrontation. It was a mirror reflecting the values of respect, dignity, and quiet strength. It was a reminder that real change doesn't announce itself with fanfare. it emerges from the unwavering commitment to do right, to listen, and to ensure that everyone, regardless of perceived status, is seen and valued. And in that quiet revolution, a community found a new benchmark for decency. At the heart of the story unfolding at Liberty First Bank's Greenfield branch was not just Walter Jennings' quiet but firm stand, but the cultural shift it ignited in its wake. The ripple effect of a simple yet powerful lesson about dignity and respect reverberated far beyond the moment of confrontation with Kelly Andrews. It settled into the branch's fabric, forcing those who worked there to confront uncomfortable truths about the way they interacted with people and how biases, often unconscious, could dictate behavior. Brian Covington's decisive handling of the situation, dismissing Kelly not because of Walter's corporate ties, but because of her exposed attitude, underscored that power and decency aren't measured by job titles but by how we treat others when we believe they have nothing to offer us. Walter's presence in the branch that day was unassuming by design. His slate gray jacket, weathered ballcap, and wheelchair blended him into the background, intentionally downplaying the reality of his ownership and authority. This deliberate humility was not about deception. It was a litmus test for integrity. The moment Kelly dismissed him with patronizing indifference, she exposed not just her own biases but a complacent system that tolerated such attitudes. Eduardo's intervention, quiet yet determined, revealed that courage often manifests not in grand gestures but in the willingness to step forward and challenge disrespect, even when doing so risks one's own standing. Terrence's instinct to record the incident was a testament to the younger generation's desire to document and hold accountable. But his later choice to delete the footage at Walter's gentle request reflected the power of trusting actions over evidence. The pivotal shift in perception that day, however, wasn't confined to the staff behind the counter. It echoed through the clients, like the teenage boy who, inspired by Walter's calm integrity, returned later to open his first account. This simple act symbolized a generational recognition of the values that should define customer service and human interaction: respect, dignity, and fairness. It wasn't Walter's wealth or title that left a mark, it was his character, his unwavering patience, and his resolve to challenge assumptions. Judith Emery's supportive stance further cemented this shift. Her public acknowledgement of Walter's influence and her visible solidarity with him demonstrated that leadership isn't about wielding power for personal gain, but about standing for what's right, especially when it means elevating someone whose voice might otherwise be ignored. Clarence Duval, the branch's long-serving janitor, offered a perspective that encapsulated the day's lessons with quiet eloquence. His simple yet heartfelt words highlighted how the true measure of a person's worth isn't determined by status but by their capacity for decency. His reflection on the way people, including Kelly, had overlooked or belittled him in the past added depth to the broader message. Respect is not a favor granted to those in positions of influence. It's a fundamental right everyone deserves. His gratitude toward Walter wasn't born from surprise but from the recognition that someone had finally seen through the veneer of workplace hierarchy and reminded them all of a basic human truth. Brian Covington's closing remarks served as both a confession and a commitment. His acknowledgement that the branch needed a cultural reset wasn't just a managerial statement, it was a call to action. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon and the glass walls reflected the fading light, the branch's atmosphere had shifted from tense anticipation to quiet resolve. Staff who might have previously seen customer service as a checklist task now understood it as a reflection of their character. Terrence's newfound attentiveness to each client, Eduardo's continued vigilance, and even the young woman from the loans desk's renewed willingness to speak up signaled a collective desire to embody the lesson Walter imparted without speaking it outright. In the end, Walter Jennings' quiet revolution wasn't just about exposing one employee's failure. It was about illuminating a broader truth: that dignity is non-negotiable and that respect should not be conditional. His story became a mirror in which everyone in that branch, and beyond, could see not only their actions but their values. It reminded them that change doesn't always come from policies or training sessions. It often begins with a single person's insistence on fairness and respect. And in the silence that followed his exit, everyone present felt the weight of that truth and the responsibility it carried into their next interaction. In the bustling world of Liberty First Bank's Greenfield branch, it wasn't the clamor of transactions or the flicker of computer screens that marked a turning point. It was the quiet, steady presence of Walter Jennings, a man whose calm resolve shattered the illusion of normalcy. When he rolled into the branch that morning, dressed plainly and unassumingly, few took notice. To Kelly Andrews, he was just another customer, perhaps even a bother, but the reality she failed to see, and the rest of the staff soon learned, was that Walter wasn't just a client. He was the branch's co-owner, a man who had invested not only money but deep trust into the very fabric of the institution. Kelly's dismissive and disrespectful treatment of him wasn't just a personal slight, it was a revelation of a deeper flaw in the culture. One that placed appearances and perceived status above basic human decency. Walter's silent grace in the face of humiliation speaks volumes about the power of restraint and dignity. Instead of lashing out or pulling rank immediately, he chose to observe, to let actions unfold and reveal the truth of character. His quiet strength was not weakness but a deliberate choice to give Kelly, and everyone else in that lobby, a chance to reflect on how they treated others. It was Eduardo's firm but respectful stand, Terrence's hesitant yet meaningful recording, and even Judith Emery's composed but knowing support that painted a picture of what solidarity and integrity can look like when people choose to do what's right. And when Kelly's mask of professionalism crumbled in the face of accountability, it wasn't Walter's wealth or influence that had spoken, it was his character. Perhaps the most profound lesson came from Clarence Duval, the janitor who had seen decades of faces pass through that branch. His quiet gratitude toward Walter was more than just appreciation. It was a recognition that respect doesn't trickle down from titles or roles, but radiates from the choices we make every day. His simple acknowledgement that he had long been overlooked or dismissed made it painfully clear that while one incident might spark change, countless others go unnoticed. Walter's message, unspoken yet powerful, reminded everyone that the way we treat those we think don't matter defines us far more than how we treat those in positions of power. By the time Walter left the branch that day, the air was thick with an unspoken understanding that things had to change. His message wasn't just for Kelly, or even for Liberty First, it was for all of us. In a world where it's easy to overlook or underestimate people based on their appearance or perceived importance, Walter's story reminds us to slow down, to listen, and to truly see one another. Respect isn't earned through titles, wealth, or status. It's owed to every person we meet simply because they're human. And so, if you find yourself nodding along to this story, feeling the weight of its truth settling in your chest, I invite you to pause. Think about the moments when you might have dismissed someone, when you might have overlooked the quiet dignity of another person. Let this be a call to action. To treat every interaction as a chance to show kindness. To lead with respect. And to stand up when you see someone being mistreated. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever witnessed a quiet act of integrity that changed your perspective? Have you been the person who stood up? Or perhaps the one who wished you had? Let's start a conversation that matters. And if stories like this resonate with you, stories that remind us of the goodness we're capable of, please subscribe to the channel. Let's build a community where decency, respect, and humanity take center stage, one story at a time. Because together, we can be the change we wish to see.